Hello, welcome everyone. Hello. It's so wonderful to have each and every one of you here tonight. It's so wonderful to be in this theatre, in this intimate space with all of you. My name is Chris Gordon. I am the Programming Manager for Readings, and on behalf of Pan Macmillan and on behalf of Readings, I am delighted that we have such a full house. I am delighted that all of you are here with us tonight. Before we get going, I want us all to reflect here in Australia just for a few moments, and I want us to feel this in our hearts, that we are all living on stolen ground, that this is not our ground, that this is ground that has been taken. It's a privilege to live in this beautiful country. It's a pleasure to live in this beautiful country, and we need to thank our Indigenous owners for this great privilege. At the moment, I'm speaking from the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects on behalf of all of you, wherever you are in Australia, to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We are so fortunate to live in a country that is being created through story time, created through an understanding of our beautiful, beautiful land. When I think about stories and when I think about how amazing it is that there's some people that have been gathering stories since the beginning of time. You know, we've all tried so long to make sense of who we are and how we are through the great art of stories. And what a treat we have for you tonight, that we have two extraordinary storytellers talking about their craft. I'd like to introduce you to Karina Kilmore. She's a finance journalist. She's an author of Where the Truth Lies. She's the national convener of Sisters in Crime, and she's a terrific friend of Jane Harper, and they've known each other since the beginning of time. Karina, please join me up on the stage. The crowd is going crazy.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Chris. What a lovely introduction, and also what a lovely recognition of us being on land of the oldest living culture of storytellers. So that's really suitable. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. Now, it's not about me, it's about Jane Harper. And I'm going to introduce Jane Harper now. Jane is the author of international bestsellers The Dry, Force of Nature and The Lost Man, and we're here tonight to celebrate the launch of her latest novel, The Survivors. That deserves a big cheers. Congratulations, Jane.
Oh, thanks, Karina. Thank you.
I hope you've all got something to sip on as we chat along tonight. Jane's books are published in 40 territories, and The Dry has also been made into a major motion picture starring Eric Bana. Jane has won lots and lots of top awards, and I'm going to list them, or some of them anyway, because it's such an impressive list. The Australian Book Industry's Book of the Year, the Australian Indie Awards Book of the Year, the UK Crime Writers Association's Gold Dagger, and the British Book Awards Crime and Thriller Book of the Year. But there's more. Jane has also won 3 David Awards from Sisters in Crime Australia and 2 Ned Kelly Awards from the Australian Crime Writers Association. But there's more. Jane's novels are so popular, they've also made her one of the top-selling authors around the world, including being listed as a New York Times best-selling author and in the UK as a Sunday Times best-selling author, not to mention all her chart-topping hits here in Australia and New Zealand. So Jane, not only are readers your biggest fans, but you're also one of those rare authors to have received high praise and recognition from the book industry and also from all those tough old literary judges around the world. So I think that deserves another sip, everybody. And would you believe it? This is actually Jane's second career. Jane has also worked as a very successful print journalist. For 13 years, she worked in Australia and the UK, and that's where we first met, working together as business journalists in Melbourne. And Melbourne is where Jane lives with her husband and 2 young children, and where we're both zooming in from tonight. And boy, haven't we had it tough in Melbourne in recent months. We've had 2 lockdowns, and we've still got a nighttime, just finished a nighttime curfew. So let's just hop straight into that. How are you coping, Jane, with all the issues around the pandemic? How do you feel having a young family stuck inside, not to mention no travel? We've both got family overseas, but also has it had an impact on your writing?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks so much, Karina, for doing this. It's always great to talk to you, and thank you everybody for zooming in. As you said, normally we'd probably be doing this live, hopefully, but it's great to kind of have this chance to do it virtually instead. And I think, like everybody, I mean, the pandemic has really kind of changed, the whole, I don't know, way we do things. I think I've been quite lucky writing-wise because I'm sure, as you know, and anybody who's sort of out there, written a novel or tried to knows there's kind of lulls, there's kind of ebbs and flows in the way, your working style. And I've been quite lucky that just by pure chance, really, lockdowns and things like that have kind of fallen at, they could have fallen at worse times, put it that way. So I think, I mean, the luckiest sort of part was really that I always like to do like an on-the-ground research trip. I think that's really important to kind of get out there and find out the things that you can't really find out, through phone calls or, not sort of being there personally. And so I wanted to do that. I've been to Tasmania a few times, which is where The Survivors is set, but I wanted to do a specific research trip. And I always try and do the research trips at quite a specific point in the writing process. So when I've kind of got the idea quite nailed down, but there's still enough flexibility to fill in those gaps that I know I need a bit more information on. So, but at the same time, I also had a baby late last year during one of the lulls in the writing period. So I timed that quite well. And so I had my baby, and then I knew I sort of needed I knew I needed to go to Tasmania and do certain things. And I wanted to go at the end of summer, which is when the book was set. But I had this sort of 12-week-old and as well as a 3-year-old. And I don't know about you, Karina, but I was sort of somewhat reluctant to, put myself in a wetsuit and go scuba diving 12 weeks after giving birth. But that's just me, But I'm a pro, so I thought I'm gonna do it. So I did. So I kind of gritted my teeth and I kind of booked this trip and all the things that I needed to do to kind of get, certain aspects of the book really cemented in my own mind. Went out there, and it was funny because I went out, and even then they were just starting to get this kind of feel through of the impact of the virus that it had on the Chinese New Year, on the fishermen and their economy in Tasmania. And they were talking about what a blow it had been economically. And I remember thinking, wow, isn't that amazing? And so sad that, this thing is happening so many miles away, is impacting these this sort of small local kind of economy here, large local economy really. And then, fast forward, I mean, I got home, and then sort of 10 days later, I kind of just sneaked in. 10 days later, we were kind of all in lockdown, and I would never have been able to go again, because that was my last chance. So I feel quite fortunate that, I probably could have maybe done the book without it, but the book is all the better for having been able to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely agree. And, there's Tasmania is such a sort of like a wild and beautiful coastline, isn't it? And we've got this terrible world event there at the moment with all these whales being stranded. And I love the way that you've sort of reinforced that in your novel, this sort of beautiful danger of the coastline there. You can tell that you've been there and you love it, and that you really understood it. So that was just gorgeous to see in the novel. So I know you won't give away any spoilers, but can you give us an elevator pitch for The Survivors?
Yes, I can. So The Survivors, as you said, so it's an Australian mystery, and it sets in along the rugged coastline of Tasmania. So it's got a lot of kind of small town intrigue and secrets to be unearthed. And it centres around the main character, who is a young guy called Kieran, who's in his 30s, and he has a partner and a young baby himself. And he grew up in a small Tasmanian town, and he returns there for a visit to help his parents, who are struggling for various reasons. And while he's there, he's barely arrived when a body is found on the beach.
Great setup. Let's talk about some themes in the book, because there's a lot of themes in here. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to spoil any of the plot, but I was really interested to read how you'd shown men and women seeing the world differently. And I see that in my teenager here at home. But why do you think we still have this society where girls and boys have this whole different childhood?
Yeah, I think, you know, the way people experience things differently was something that kind of became quite an important thread, I think, through the book. And it was something I was thinking about quite a lot when I was writing it, because you know, you always want your characters to kind of react authentically, and there's no real one size fits all for that. And it really depends so specifically on, you know, their background, their age, their kind of support system within the family. And I guess, you know, what you perceive to be maybe a personal threat as well. And I think one of the big, you know, ways that kind of really manifested itself in the book, when I was, you know, kind of really thinking about, you know, the characters and their reactions, was that when, you know, when this body is found in a small community, everybody reacts in different ways. And, you know, there's the women generally are very reluctant to go down to the beach, and, you know, and don't really want to be there on their own, and sort of think twice about walking past there. Whereas then you've got your main character, who's a guy in his 30s and has no problem walking through town, you know, and being out at night and being out on his own and things. And I think, and every character sort of reacts a little bit differently to that, you know, and I guess it depends, you know, what you know and who you are. And I think, you know, that's something you're thinking about throughout the book, because at the end you want people to be able to look back and think, you know, yeah, that all adds up. Like, everybody behaved in the way that they should behave based on what they know and who they are.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating, really intriguing too, as you read it and you're thinking, why does this person feel that way? So it's great. It's a great device. Grief's another theme in the survivors. I think, you know, Kieran is almost sort of mourning the loss of his father, who has dementia, and he's described that impact on Kieran really beautifully. My father-in-law recently died from Alzheimer's. It's sort of an issue that affects lots of families, but also he's also seems to be grieving the sort of the loss of his childhood innocence. Is that something that you wanted to explore? Is that something deliberate, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, for me, like, the themes are always sort of character driven, and you know, it's kind of a balance between thinking about, you know, what role each character needs to play and what they're going to contribute to the plot, and then trying to present that in a, you know, in an authentic and sensitive and believable way. Because my grandmother had dementia as well, and I remember, you know, it felt like she was gone a long time before she died, you know, and I think that's something that Kieran feels about his relationship with his father. And I think the, you know, the kind of those sort of feelings of, you know, grief and, you know, maybe guilt about, you know, things left unsaid, or things, you know, that have been done that you can't, maybe feel you can't fix, is again something that manifests itself in different ways in different people. So, like, as part of the research, you know, you know, as I said, I went to Tasmania to get a lot of the physical, kind of the landscape and the feeling, and talk to people about their time in, you know, growing up in like small communities and what their lives are like. But I think it's also important to try and get that psychological element right as well. And so I spoke to a lead clinical advisor from Beyond Blue about grief and guilt, and particularly how it shows itself in young men, and also what kind of, you know, treatment they're maybe offered or advised on, how successful that is, what people find useful, what happens when they don't find it useful, you know, and things like that, to try and, I guess, you know, because you always want to sort of, if you're going to sort of touch on themes, I think you want to really represent them in the best way possible within the plot and the characters that you've created.
Yeah, no, you did that really well. It feels really safe reading about those issues in the book. It's done really well. And selective memory, which is very handy at times. I've had it myself. But selective memory also comes into play in the novel. Or is it survival memory, when big trauma makes people remember things differently?
Yeah, I think that's something, again, I think a lot of people have experienced in different ways, that sort of feeling of, things being maybe not quite as you thought they were. And I kind of like that for two reasons. One, because I think it is really real. And I know I've sort of experienced that myself a lot of times. I mean, in very sort of, non-crime ways. But for example, when I grew up in Australia, formed a lot, when I was a child, I formed a lot of very strong memories. And then when I moved back to England and then moved back to Australia as an adult, it was quite surprising to me how inaccurate some of those were, and how I'd kind of overinflated certain parts or misremembered certain things. In my mind was so crystal clear, and I think it can be quite disorienting sometimes to find that actually what you really thought was true is not actually what it is. And I think we've maybe all had that experience in some ways. And then I think I also like it from a plot point of view, because one of my favorite things in books is that kind of plot line where, as a reader, you're reading things and you think something, and then new information emerges, or you see a different sort of point of view, and it completely sort of changes your perspective. And it's sort of that kind of kaleidoscope thing where everything sort of resettles in a different way. And, there's some books that do that brilliantly. I mean, like Gone Girl, I think, is a really beautiful example of that, where, there's sort of a shift and everything looks different. And I love that. I love that sensation as a reader. So, I think that's something I'm always kind of interested in when I'm writing.
Yeah, it shows, and it comes across really well in the storyline. I think guilt too, you cover that off as well, guilt for being a survivor, and that's always a hard thing for people in all sorts of situations, to go through a trauma with someone and then feel awful about surviving it. Is that something you wanted to deliberately include, or is that something that sort of the character just came about through the character?
Yeah, I mean, I always, so when I'm sort of writing, I should go back. When I'm sort of thinking of the story, I always, I never sort of set out to write about a certain theme. Like, it's not, I don't sort of sit down and think I'm going to write about this particular issue, or I really want to bring this out. I always sort of start with the plot, and it's always, that's the kind of core. And then, I build the characters around that. And then it's really when I'm starting to think about those characters and what they have been through, and what their relationships are like now, and kind of just who they are. Part of that is thinking about what sort of things are affecting them, and keeping them awake at night, and I think that is where the themes start to emerge, especially if that's sort of you're trying to get them in a kind of really authentic way. I spent a really long time thinking about that, and the themes tend to emerge quite naturally, I think. And I always try and let the characters drive those themes. I try and avoid sort of shoehorning things in, because I think as a reader you can often tell when that's happened, when the author has a really sort of a point they really want to make. Yeah. And they're sort of determined to make it, and the characters will make that point, like it or not, whether it's sort of whatever it takes. So I always sort of try and let it go the other way around, and if the themes will emerge to the extent that they emerge, and people will pick up on things that resonate with them, I guess. So it's about kind of presenting certain things, then readers can kind of relate to that based on their own experience.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to be able to do that. And I shouldn't highlight all these dark themes, although dark themes are often, sort of what attracts people to crime novels. But you balance this darkness too with this beautiful, lovely hope and light that Kieran has in his life from the joy of having a new baby. And speaking of baby Audrey, I think you had a little baby snuggled in your pouch walking along the beach in Tassie at the same time you were writing The Survivors. Is that how baby Audrey's character came about?
So no, although, you know, maybe in years to come, my son will look back and wish I sort of could answer yes to that. I think I had already decided, I'd already kind of worked out the makeup of Kieran's family before my own baby came along. But I think it definitely informed that character, you know, because it was quite serendipitous in that I was sort of in Tasmania with this 12-week-old, and you know, and it kind of fits that the baby in the book would be about 12 weeks. So so that sort of at least gave me, that was quite easy research, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think you know, I think quite a lot about yeah, what the characters, you know, what kind of family and things they're going to have. And I sort of learnt my lesson a little bit, I would say, with Fork in the first book, who is an only child and his parents are dead and he doesn't have any siblings, you know, doesn't have any siblings. And that sort of, although I think that suits his character, and I'm happy that is sort of true to, I think, the character that I wanted to create, you know, with him. I was sort of aware, you know, with him that sort of closes off a few avenues. You know, it doesn't really, you have to then create relationships in other ways too, like friendships or, you know, or colleagues, or, you know, things like that. So so that is something I consider quite closely now, you know, when I'm creating a new character, like what is there, who's going to be in their kind of support circle, I suppose. And I think, you know, having, so Kieran, you know, as I said, he comes back to this town, and he grew up there, and his memories are very sort of strongly cemented in his teenage years. You know, he was sort of 18 or so when he went off to university with, you know, some traumatic event behind him. And I think, you know, part of the thing I found really interesting about him was that idea of homecoming and being a different person when you return. So having his daughter, baby Audrey, and also having his dad having, you know, his own health issues, I think they both in a way sort of contributed to his character in the same way, albeit in different ways, maybe in a negative and a positive way, in that he's forced to take on this responsibility that he never had when he was a teenager, and he was quite sort of careless and carefree, you know, as many people are when they're 18. But now he comes back and he sort of has this dual sort of expectation of responsibility from both the, you know, generation above and the generation below. And I think that really sort of, for him, kind of highlights, I think, how, you know, that he has changed, and his life is different from you know, what it was when he used to live there, and forces him to kind of reflect, I think, on his own behaviour and his own actions, and things that, again, like things he thought he knew to be true, with the benefit of a few years maturity under his belt, and, you know, just that little bit of extra hindsight, you know, how that sort of changes his perception of things.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to see that. I also noticed a little bit more of you in this book, Jane. One of the characters is an author who was previously a journalist. How did that come about?
Did you see something of yourself in?
I saw a little bit.
I think yeah. So for those of you who haven't read the book, there's a character in the book called George Barlin, and so he's a very successful author who was moved to this small country town for a sea change, and, you know, seeking a bit of inspiration for his work. And so, you know, I guess I hope all the characters, you know, he's more than his job as well. Like he has sort of depths that you know, are not immediately obvious. But I think you know, it's sort of twofold. Because I think with you know, when you're sort of like crafting like the cast of characters, like you want them all to pull their weights, you know, so you need everybody to kind of have a purpose. And I think, you know, when I sort of build the plan, I'm sort of thinking about what everybody is doing there and what they're contributing to the plots, and how they're sort of, you know, why they need to be there, I guess. And part of that is ideally having a bit of a mix of locals and outsiders to whatever situation you're in. It doesn't necessarily have to be a town. It could be just be a situation, but people who are kind of inside and outside, because I think they offer a really different perspective on things. And it's the opportunity to kind of, people based on their knowledge and their background will ask different questions of each other, and they will have a different view of what's happening, and they will have different loyalties as well. So that's sort of how, I guess in this early sense, how George came to be, because he is one of those outsiders. And then in terms of then coming back to creating realistic characters, you sort of think, well, what would bring a man like that to a town like this? Because I wanted as well him to be an outsider, not just literally as a new person, but someone who lived quite a different lifestyle to a lot of the characters in the book, and that sort of it sort of makes it hard then to know how much trust there is between people, and how well people can read each other when you don't really have that sort of shared background. So what could this, who's this character, and what brings sort of someone like that to a town like this? And there's quite a few sort of probably professions at your disposal, but I thought best-selling author, former journo, why not? So I thought that was something that really gave a lot of opportunity for for questions and discussion within the sort of the character dialogue, and I just thought it would also be quite fun.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Yeah. Some people think that being a journalist makes it easier to switch to being a fiction writer. How did you find that? Do you think that makes a difference or not?
Yeah, I think it did. Do you think it did?
Yeah, I do, from a discipline point of view. Yeah,
I think so too. I think, for me, it did. That's not to say I don't think for a second that if you haven't been a journalist, that means you can't write a novel.
Yeah.
That's clearly not true, because majority of novelists probably aren't journalists. Although there's a really significant percentage that do have that background, and I think it's something that I think, like that discipline I found has really helped me. And I think I was really surprised actually when I started to try to write fiction, how transferable the skills were, because it does, on the surface, it does feel like a really different form of writing. Not least that you have to kind of, make it all up yourself, whereas when you're writing a news article, you've got the facts there and you've got quotes, and you're sort of presenting what happened, really. But I think in terms of actually presenting the story in written form, having that newsroom skill of kind of grabbing people early and being aware that their attention will wander, so trying to give them that kind of enough to kind of keep them sort of flicking their eyes to the next paragraph, and ideally all the way to the ends, I think was a really valuable skill to have. Yeah, because I don't know, baby, I still remember when I was a cadet, someone saying, you should assume people will not read to the end of your articles. Like you have to get the good stuff up in the start, because they won't bother. So I'm always sort of aware of that with the books. I'm like, please keep reading.
Yeah, that's right. Please keep reading. And I'd love you to explain your writing routine and how you meet your deadlines, because knowing you as well as I do, a confession here, you really swan around in a silver caftan sipping gin and tonics all day. But
taking my books to my secretary.
Yeah. But give us the official version.
So what do I do? So I kind of so when I start, so say I'll finish the Survivors promote tour and things, and then when I'll sort of start a new book, and the first thing I do is I actually now I tend to take quite a lot of time thinking about it first. Like I really sort of build that into the schedule, because I think it really doesn't do me any benefit to kind of jump straight in with the first idea and just start writing. Is just honestly for me a complete waste of time. Like it's such a kind of poor use of resources, because I think whoever you are trying to write a novel, everybody has you know, pressures, you know, we all have like kind of family pressures or work pressures. I mean, I'm lucky enough to be able to do this full time now, but, you know, when I was running the dry, I was working, you know, as we both were in the newsroom, and that was quite full on, and, you know, long hours and things. So you've got to kind of make the most of the time you have. So for me, what I do is I tend to think quite a lot about, you know, what I'm going to write about first. And I tend to, and so what I've realized I do now, it's taken me a little while to realize this is how I do it, but this is how I do it. I find when I think of an idea that's going to work, I find actually it's the end rather than the start. And that's the idea that tends to stick. It's this kind of you know, conclusion, which is that bit in the book where the reader sort of gets right to the end, like, oh my God, that's what happened. And that's the bit that sort of sticks. And I think in reality, like, you know, what drives someone to behave in extreme circumstances where they're doing something, you know, that sort of, you know, commits harm to someone else, or they've been pushed to kind of a desperate act, you know, and what is it that's kind of led them down that road? Because most people, you know, reasonable people will try anything else, you know, legal recourse or reaching out to the police or whatever, you know. So you're trying to think of the circumstances that have driven like an otherwise, you know, really sort of probably someone who considers himself a reasonable, normal person to an extreme act. And once I've kind of got that in my head, that is really the kind of the core of the book. And then I'll start building the characters around it, and they will remain quite two-dimensional for quite a long time. So they'll be sort of filling roles in terms of, like I was saying, you know, insider, outsider, who has an overview of what's maybe happened, who has an inside view, who is a red herring, who is, you know, going to be a distraction, that kind of thing. And I'm sort of building these characters that fill roles. And then, you know, I'm sort of building backwards and working out where I'm going to start the story and drop the reader in. So we're all kind of funneling towards this end point. And then the characters start to kind of flesh out. And that's where the themes, you know, we were talking about start to emerge when you think about, you know, who they are and what they're thinking about. And then I'll sort of go to my office and I'll start sort of, I'll plan this and I'll plan it out in, you know, with really sort of, skeleton detail at first, like just, you know, maybe 10 sentences. And then if I feel like that kind of is about right, I'll sort of work that out a bit, and then I'll kind of flesh it out maybe to 20 sentences, and I'll start sort of building up this picture. And the reason I do that is because I think, you know, sometimes when I tell people I plan a lot, they sort of feel like, you know, that it sort of strips it of their creativity, you know, and they kind of feel like writing, they sort of sit down and write the book. And if that, you know, I think if that works for you, absolutely, like, you know, whatever works for you is the right way to do it. But for me, I find that planning helps me be more creative, because it allows me to test out ideas without having to spend a month on them only to delete it. Yeah. So I can, you know, I can try it out I can try something out with a few hundred words or a few sentences even, and think, is that working? And how is that helping? And if it's not helping, you know, it's a morning's work, it's not a month's work, and I can delete it and I can try something else, and I can keep trying things until I think, you know, actually, yes, that is the best possible route from A to B to C for me to, you know, to take this book. So that's how I do it. And I do sort of, and I have an office a bit away from home, and I go there. I have paid for some third-party childcare for my children. On some days, my husband takes them the other days. And I just go, and I kind of treat it like I did when we were in a newsroom. Like, I sort of go in the morning and I sort of set myself mini deadlines, and long-term and medium-term. So I know where I need to be in the schedule, and I just try and stick to them as best as possible. And as long as I kind of stick mostly to that plan, which I try and make as realistic as possible as well in terms of time, then I know that after a certain amount of time, I probably will have a finished draft. Yeah.
Well, you have 4 times in a row.
Like that. That's all it is.
That's right. So just before we get to our audience tonight, let's just do a quick backtrack on the dry. your first novel. It's a movie now. And you're in it. How did that come about? How did that come about? And more importantly, have you got your red carpet dress?
Well, I was going to coordinate. I was going to see what other celebrities were there and then coordinate with them, so we can do a sort of who wore it better type thing. But yeah, so The Dry is officially a film now, which is great. They filmed it last year in kind of over a few different areas in sort of northwestern Victoria, which I thought location-wise was perfect. It really was like visually, I thought visually perfect for the book. And then, but it was so remote that they very kindly invited me up to see if I wanted to go and see it in action, which of course I said yes. And it was so remote, they actually needed people to fill the seats in the funeral and wake scenes, really, because I think they were sort of grabbing locals from miles around,
small town.
So that was a good opportunity for me to obviously stretch my other creative abilities, and so I went along and got to be in it, sitting in this funeral. So if you look out in the funeral scene, I'm sitting in the second row for about half a second, looking really sad. And because actually it was quite sad, because it felt like a real funeral. It had the organ going, and it had like one of the orders of service, and this kind of really sad montage of just like family and happier times. And so it was really fun. Got to meet Eric Bana, and then I got to see the finished film earlier this year. And and it's really superb. I'm honestly so delighted with it. I really could not have asked for a better adaptation. And I think I mean, as an author, you hand over your work and you hope that the adaptation is going to kind of do it justice. But we've all been there with like books we love and seeing films that don't maybe quite strike the right note, But I thought this one really nailed it. I was really, really blown away. They've hit all the high spots. The characters are so recognizable in kind of spirit and tone. It's a great watch. You really kind of, I feel, been gripped for the whole sort of 2 hours. I think really faithful and thoughtful adaptation of the book, without being sort of slavish to it. So yeah, absolutely. Credit to Robert Connolly, the director and screenwriter. He did both of those, and I think has really done an amazing job. And Eric Bana is as wonderful as you would expect. So,
I can't wait to watch it. It just sounds perfect. Yeah, but of course that's not your first screen appearance. You're also already a soapy star on The Neighbours.
Well, actually, the film was my first, getting my feet wet in the acting business. But then on the back of that, so I did. For anybody who's interested, it was on December 12th last year, and I got to make a cameo appearance on Neighbours when I. There's a really nice man in the writing room of Neighbours who really enjoys the books, and got in contact to see if they could use a book as a prop. And I think my enthusiasm shone through, and just invited me on to do a cameo where I basically donate a box of books, my own books, to their literacy program, which was really fun. So maybe that's still available in the archives. I'm not sure.
It sounds like fun. Okay, so let's get to our audience. And guys, we've got guys and gals, we've got a little speed dating session for you with Jane. You can ask her almost anything. If our lovely host Chris Gordon can put down her glass of bubbly, maybe let's see some questions if we've got some questions. How are we going with that, Chris?
And I've just sent them through to you on the chat function, Karina.
Okay, let's have a look. Okay, from Megan. Do you feel that you write fragments of your own personality or appearances into those of your, or experiences into those of your characters?
Yeah, thank you, Megan. I think inevitably, I think you as an author, you probably know to yourself, Karina, I think you do draw on your own experiences, because that's your only lived experience, really. Having said that, though, I think it's really important to be aware that your characters will have a different life experience from the one that I have. And I think it's really important not to kind of put words in their mouth that maybe wouldn't feel natural for them. So I do spend a long time kind of really thinking about how they're, what would their perspective be on any given situation, and being aware that that's not going to be necessarily my experience. So if it's something I'm not sure of as well, I will tend to ask people. So I will go to Tasmania and ask people what's it like to grow up in a town like this, or go to Beyond Blue and say, what's it like to be a young man dealing with grief issues, so I'll try and I guess that's a journalist in background, if I'm not sure, I'll make sure I ask.
Okay, from Paul, your descriptive writing of landscapes, the settings, are they your own, are their own character? Your writing process, does the setting come first? Or do you write around characters, or a combination of both?
So yeah, thank you, Paul. That's a good question. The setting comes really early for me. Almost really at the same time as I'm working out the plot. So, I'm thinking about, like I said before, I think about this idea that is kind of going to be the end point. And I'm already sort of thinking about, okay, well, like this extreme situation I'm talking about in terms of getting people to a certain point, what would be maybe a setting that would support that? And that could be something like, for example, actually The Lost Man, my previous book, is quite an easy example to use, where you've got characters who are in such an isolated, remote setting that has really impacted everything from their mental health to their relationships to, how they buy their food and who they can talk to and things like that. So that was a really good example, I think, of how the setting was really integral to the plot. And that's always what I'm aiming for. I always want it to ideally the reader will get to the end of the book and look back and think, actually, yes, that story could not have been told in any other setting than this.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm sorry that we've got lots and lots of questions, Jane, but we've actually run out of time because we've talked too much. So thank you for being with us today, and I think Chris is going to jump in and say a goodbye to everybody. So audience, thank you for joining us. I know we were sold out today. This would have to be your biggest book launch ever, Jane. Over 1,000 people.
I think it would be. And thank you so much for Karina for for talking to me. I know these things take time and preparation. And I also want to say congratulations and good luck for the Ned Kelly Awards, where your novel Where the Truth Lies is shortlisted this year. So good luck. Yeah. That's a great achievement.
Oh, thank you, Jane. That's lovely. Thank you.
So remember, everyone, that we're in a theatre at the moment, and the house lights have gone on, but still, Karina and Jane, there's still applause. Do you know what I mean? Do you know that when the house lights go on, when the organisers are saying, okay, everyone, the show is over, but the audience refuse to leave the theatre, and the sound is so enormous. That is actually what's happening right now, Jane and Karina, because listening to you two, and please, when will you get your own podcast, was just extraordinary. Jane, the queue to get books signed is starting to snake around the theatre. I'm sort of desperately running around saying, everyone, just form a line, please, form a line. But also, at times, grabbing some people in the audience and just having a moment where we look at each other and we say, how good was that? How good was that? To you, Jane, thank you so much for your stories. To you, Karina, thank you so much for asking the most perfect questions, the questions that I know the entire audience wanted to know, and I do know that because they were sending them through to me. You were a dream. You were both a dream. I absolutely toast both of you.
Oh, thank you, Chris, and thank you so much, everybody who tuned in tonight. And this is a little bit different from coming to a live author event. And thank you, Chris, for and to all the readings for organising this and giving us the opportunity, to do this despite lockdown and despite all the challenges of having to organise something like this. I really appreciate, you give me a chance to kind of talk to people about my book.
A complete pleasure. On behalf of Pam McMillan, on behalf of Readings, on behalf of all of you out there, stay safe. Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you so much, Karina. We are so looking forward to you getting back to your study and sorting out the next book, Jane. The next. Oh my goodness, she hasn't even caught her breath. I know. I know. So much love to you all out there. Good night, everybody.
Good night.